Chris Helvey. Come on in. This typewriter is one that I began writing on back in the late 1960s with some very forgettable prose and some term papers for school. And down below is a group of books. My mother read every one of the Laura Ingalls Wilder series to us. So, Little House in the Big Woods, Little House on the Prairie, all of those, she read those, and they're some of my favorite memories. And every few years I go back and read them again, remembering her. And I'd like to talk for just a few minutes about how I became a writer. And I think it goes back to, you've all probably heard the expression, we become what we eat. And that's true with our physical sense, but I think in our brain we become in large part what we read. And reading is so important. I grew up in a family of readers. My mother read to us every night, my brother, my sister, and myself. And for years, until I was well up in school. And my father, one of my fondest memories of him is as I would head to bed every night. He would be sitting in his easy chair, smoked a cigar, but he was also reading a book. And I think those memories stayed with me. And I became a reader in school, and it was very important to me. One of my earliest memories, grew up in a small town in Missouri called Crane, was walking down to the library by myself and checking out books. They were primarily biographies, Jim Bridger, Kit Carson, that sort of thing, and then gradually began to read more and more and tried my hand at writing back in the 80s and wrote a 300-page sci-fi about a group of prisoners put on a planet that to harvest wheat. The harvest works year-round as the planet rotated, and it was an interesting experiment, not very well written, and it ended up being tossed. But then later on, as I began to end my career in state government, Kentucky state government, I started writing and sending out short stories, poems, getting a few accepted here and there, of course getting a few rejections too, that's part of the game. And then I ended up going to Spalding University to pick up my Master's of Fine Arts in Writing. It's a wonderful program they have down there, a limited residency, so we would go 1 week in the spring and 1 week in the fall. And our dorm was the Brown Hotel in Louisville, so that's not bad as far as dormitory accommodations go. We would have workshops and classes, and we would have speakers, and Sina Jeter Naslund and Silas House and Crystal Wilkinson, many very talented people involved in the program then and now. And then we would have a mentor in between. We would have writing assignments, and I would send those in. And that was a very good learning experience because no one knows it all in the beginning. In fact, no one knows it all at the end. We're all learning all the time. And so I began to, once I graduated, send out more stories, began to have more success. First success was really with a group called Best New Writing. They had a short story competition each year, and I participated in that and was actually able to get into the finals in 2007 and was in their anthology. Didn't win, but we certainly don't win all the contests we enter. And then started writing novels and hooked on with the press, Hopewell Press out of New Jersey. They published some of my early novels. I had short stories and poems going to other literary journals, and things went along very well. I served as an editor at Hopewell Press later, but they published my first novel, whose name I did not know. And I think the question I always get about writing is, where did you get your ideas? Well, we can talk for just a minute about that one. That one came by just reading the paper one day, and I saw where a couple of former UK football players had been accused of a minor crime somewhere down in western Kentucky, and that got me to thinking, what about a book concerning a former UK football player who has kind of fallen on hard times, taken up with drink, not where he wants to be in life? We're talking about Whose Name I Did Not Know, which was my first novel, And here's the cover. Fred Hopewell Press did a nice job. And at the same time I was working on the novels, I was also working to what I call pay back. So many people in the world of writing, literature, have been so good to me, and I wanted to give others an opportunity, so I launched a journal called Trajectory, and kind of the old-fashioned way, so hard copy submissions. And this is a cover of one issue of Trajectory. Publishes writers from anywhere, any writers on any genre, although I tend not to do much sci-fi or fantasy there, but some. And they submit hard copy the old-fashioned way. For example, I get a submission here, and I take a look at those, and I'll read each submission and then respond to the individual, and they can, I'll tell them whether or not they've been accepted, and what issue they'll be in. And I do 2 issues a year with Trajectory, one in the spring and one in the fall. And right now we have issue 25 in progress. It should be out before the week is out, and I'm looking forward to moving on to issue 26, and I'm already reading ahead for issue 27. But to get back to the writing, some of my earlier successes were poetry, and one of the very first ones was a publication that was called the Minnetonka Review, and it is one that was published up in Minnesota. I think it's no longer in publication now. Literary journals come and go, so it's fortunate that I was able to get in there. And I wrote a poem that they accepted called "On the Boulevard," which turned out later to be the name of a poetry chapbook that Finishing Line Press over in Georgetown, Kentucky published a few years ago. And I'll just real quickly read "On the Boulevard" for us. This poem reflects my mindset. It talks about who I'm reading, how they impacted me, and it's a little inside view of my life at the time I wrote this. It is 3 a.m. and I am reading Bukowski, writing about Spain and bulls and Hemingway, and outside on the boulevard it is raining. Like pouring piss out of a boot, and I pour myself another cup of coffee and remember you. The shards of your memory slice me like rusty razor blades, and I bleed. And outside on the boulevard, it is raining, like pouring piss out of a boot. So that was a poem, and I write poems all the time. Some of them never see the light of day, and others I do send out and occasionally get one published. And poetry, for me, comes almost in a flash. It comes as one thread of words, and they flow. And I think the important thing with poetry is the pacing. I think you have to watch where you are in terms of the length of your lines, where you put your commas, where you break your stanzas. And I do some revision on poetry, although not too much. Different story altogether with my fiction, and I write primarily fiction these days. Short stories and novels, and even a novel of 70,000, 75,000 words is one I'm going to work on revising 6, 7, 8 times before it's ever ready for publication. And people always ask, give me some writing advice. And the first thing I would always tell them is to read. By reading, you find out what you like, what you don't like, and while you won't copy anybody, the words you read that work for you tend to find their way in one form or another into your own work. And I think you have to write the story that you want to read. If you can write to a formula, and some people do, and they may have great success with it, but I don't find any satisfaction in that. I try to write, and if I characterize my own writing, I would say it was realistic fiction. I try to be as real as I can. I try to write lines, words, paragraphs, chapters that carry an aura of believability about them. No Superman, no monster women, none of those kind of things in my work. But you find with each novel and with each short story, they turn out differently. For example, some of them you write and they just come and go all the way through in one long writing process. I used to write so many words a day, and I've kind of gotten away from that, but I try to write every day, and some of them go straight through. Others don't. Others you start, and for example, there's one that I had a year or so ago called Last Train to Miami, and it's about a mafia hitman who goes sent from Philadelphia to Miami to take care of a family member who's not paying his debts. And I started on that one. I got about 25,000 words in. And I didn't like where I was going with it. It was just kind of boring and dragging, and I just tossed that aside and left it for a year or two and came back to it. The second time through, I got about 30,000 words and didn't like those. The characters were too cinematic, the women were too beautiful and the men were too handsome, and so we discarded that one, and I just drifted away from it, worked on others. But the third time around, and this really was when COVID struck, had a lot of time at home, and I sat down and got going on the Last Train to Miami again, and this time it went all the way and it turned out very well, and a publisher ended up accepting it. I've talked a little bit about my past in writing, and then we'll shift gears for a moment and talk about what I'm working on now. And that's a novel in progress called Afghan Love Potion, which is about an American soldier who's badly injured in Afghanistan and returns home, and the explosive device that damaged him physically and mentally, he's very scarred, he's lost one eye. That's the Afghan Love Potion in the book. What I think kind of makes this book unique and interesting is that each chapter begins with a poem, and the story just kind of came to me first with the words Afghan Love Potion, and the phrase got in my mind and stuck there, and I started writing. And this is the first novel that I ever outlined before I wrote. All the others I've just kind of gone with the flow, seat of the pants writing more, if you will. And I'll just read the first poem and the first paragraph from the first chapter. The character's name here, the protagonist, is a young man named Kurt Jordan. He was an all-state football player. Now he returns home to his small town. His father was a former sheriff who's just died in a rather suspicious automobile accident. But this book opens, and we find Kurt in a hospital, a veterans hospital. And chapter 1, the poem Mirror Image. The image you see in a mirror is nothing more than a distorted reflection of reality, changing as you move, as the light transforms, as your mind spirals. The real you, the true you, lives inside your mind, and only there. And even that changes from one breath to the next, and all other visions are nothing more than illusions. So that opens the chapter, and here's the first paragraph from this novel, which, if all goes well, will be out in a few months. I came out of the dream in a long, smooth, parabolic curve, feeling at one with the universe. Then I heard footsteps and scrambled for my rifle, only to realize I was lying in a bed in the Coatesville VA Medical Center. Daylight drifted in through the window, smearing my covers and coating the floor. And the story goes on to follow Kurt and other people, and it's really, in its essence, about the damage that individuals suffer. Kurt is a damaged individual. Some of his friends are damaged individuals, and then he does return to his hometown. And some of the people he knows, and some of them he does not. Some of the businesses are the same name, and some are not. but they've all changed. And so Kurt has to work his way through these and his battles with his PTSD, his depression, and some very dangerous people that he encounters. People want to know about your writing style, how you write, when you write, and I do my best writing these days early in the morning. I get up as early as I can, rouse myself out of the bed, fix myself a cup of coffee, and sit down at the computer. There are fewer interruptions in. I'm fresher, and I get started right away and try to plug on for a couple hours until, life begins to intervene, and that happens a lot. In addition to my own writing and to publishing and editing Trajectory Journal, I'm in a really interesting and fun writing group here in Kentucky, in central Kentucky, the Bluegrass Writers Coalition. And this group, which is a 501c3 organization, came about in the conversation I had with a good buddy and a fellow writer, a really talented writer named Michael Embry. And Michael and I were talking one day over a cup of coffee, and he says, I wish we'd get together with a group of writers once a month and just have some coffee and conversation about writing, literature, what we're reading, that sort of thing. And so we started, and we began a few years ago up at Thornhill, one of their rooms. Kind of outgrew that, went to Panera Bread for a while, and we outgrew that. So we moved on down to Paul Sawyer Public Library, where we meet once a month. We've also started a fiction critique group, and we try to, our mission, the Bluegrass Writers Coalition's mission, is to promote literature in all forms across Kentucky. And we're doing a number of things with that. We have a writers' conference each spring, and then we've just launched our first short story contest. And it's open, and it's got some very nice prizes, and we're accepting submissions. They just have to have the story, or the writer has to have a Kentucky connection. And as people become writers, they join Bluegrass Writers Coalition, we often find out how they began their writing, and kind of refers to it as the roots of their writing. Remember Alex Haley several years ago, wonderful book on roots, the roots of generations of African Americans, and a great television series. And I'd like to go back to my roots as a reader and then as a writer by sharing a very short poem here about my father. And this is really based on real life, and this one was indeed drawn from real life. It's called Missouri Nocturne, 1959. Evening is settling into a purple stillness. Fireflies dance across the mysterious dark. Whippoorwills call from redolent lilacs. A man sits, tired yet satisfied. His son crawls at his feet. The man sings broken lines welcoming night. Mine eyes have seen the glory, and way down in Missouri. His son pauses, listens in the gauzy tranquility. Words in man, etching immutable hieroglyphics. Truths chronicled for yet another lifetime.